Great, good afternoon. We are delighted to be joined by representatives of the members of the elders, Gro Harlem Brundtland, Mary Robinson, and Lakhdar Brahimi. Welcome back to all of you. Ms. Brundtland, I think you will start. Please go ahead.
The three of us are part of a group that of independent former leaders that was initiated by Nelson Mandela a decade ago. In fact, we have our 10 years anniversary this summer. So he gave us the mandate to use our influence to speak truth to power without fear or favor, and to give a voice to the voiceless in the fight for peace, democracy, and human rights. Now, as you can see, one decade ahead, now, another decade, there is no less need for that mission. It is as vital as ever. And, of course, the work of the United Nations and our other international multilateral institutions are crucial in building a world of the kind that Nelson Mandela was advocating. So multilateralism has to be promoted. It has to be understood by the younger generations. And that's our hope, that they may be more in that mode than maybe some of the generations that we belong to, or that in the middle here, where certainly lately there has been more of a challenge to some of the ideas that are the only ones that can bring us forward. The ideas about solving problems in an interconnected world through multilateralism. The challenges we face are bigger than any country can solve alone. And as you are aware, we have all been senior UN officials. We know that also the UN needs revitalization, it needs support, it needs reform. And we, for instance, in the last couple of years, we have been advocating UN reform as elders. We had made some proposals with regard to the Secretary General selection, which opened up, I think, helped open up a broader process, which was, I think, of benefit to the United Nations as an institution, but certainly gives the present Secretary General a broader and stronger mandate than in the way that that selection was done previously. Now, it is, of course, well, we are still having several of our ideas about reform of the Security Council, not really giving too much traction, but we still feel very strongly that there needs to be a restraint on the use of the veto when the issue is mass atrocities and the danger of mass atrocities. So still there are things to be done here, and consensus is not easy to create, but it's the only way forward, as it was in the Paris Agreement. In the example, another multilateral success story, the Iran agreement, is also an example of multilateralism working, at least to build consensus. We have a time of heightened global tensions. Therefore, the advocacy and the consistency of the message about multilateralism is relevant, and it needs to be pursued. The alternative ideas of advocating, countries first and not countries collaborating is not really the message of the future. When you look at anything from the nuclear issues to sustainable development and climate, the issue of inequality and overcoming of poverty, we need to work together. So that's our main messages, and that's we will take your questions in any of the areas we have been discussing. Also, of course, with the Secretary General yesterday, I should have mentioned that. We had a fruitful, constructive, and broad discussion with the new Secretary General yesterday in the presence of our chair, Kofi Annan. And as you can imagine, it was an amicable and open and interesting, inspiring discussion, given what we are all facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sherwood?
Well, to the elders, welcome. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, welcome back to the United Nations. I know you've all been here before, so familiar territory for you. Your comments on multilateralism appear to be directed at the choir, if you will. How do you ensure that the message you have just articulated is conveyed to people in the United States that have the greatest doubts about the future of this organization?
Of course, I should maybe have said even that, I mean, to the benefit of the United States and its people need multilateralism as much as any other country does. So this is what we will be pointing at and reminding people of. I think this is a message that needs to be understood in the US as well as across the world.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to the UN, Mr. Brahimi and all others. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam. I am the bureau chief of the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi that is based in London. And I want to welcome you here, and I was a former UN staff also. But I want to ask your opinion about the situation in Palestine. 50 years of occupations and almost 70 years of disposition, displacement, and despair. And I don't know if the wisdom reaches every part of the world, except when it comes to Palestine. Gaza has been under siege for 10 years. Can you speak loud against these atrocities committed against the Palestinian people and use your wisdom and knowledge of producing some ideas and present these ideas with force to those who are in charge? I mean, 181 countries voted for the right of Palestinians to self-determination, but one country holds the veto power, keep delaying this again and again. So what do you say to that? Thank you.
Well, I would say that when we were all called together by Nelson Mandela back 10 years ago, and we had our first discussions about what areas on the global agenda, what issues, what situations needed the attention also of a group of independent leaders. Obviously, the Israel-Palestinian conflict and the Middle East conflict was high on our agenda.
One of the three.
Yeah, we had, so one of the three, Lakhdar is reminding us of the most important ones. And we have been many visits as a group or as representatives of the elders to Palestine, to Israel over the years. And we have been speaking out with loud voices, together with President Carter, who has been with us on these occasions, and who was an elder until last year. So I think we have had quiet, clear voices about the Gaza situation, about the Palestinian people and their rights, about the settlements, which is breaking international law. Now, even though we and others have been consistent and speaking out about the tragedy, we see that with the present leaders and the present situation on both sides, it seems we are not at a stage where there is great hope for big developments in the coming weeks or months. Now, this is very unfortunate because it has been going on for much too long. But we don't, I mean, it's, when I was Prime Minister of Norway, the two-state solution as a basis and the agreements back then were formulated. But as we have seen, although there is no alternative solution that anyone can really describe as a good one, we still are 20 years later, or more even, 24 years later, still in a quagmire. Now, both of my colleagues have had a long time engagement also on these issues. So please, I mean, Lakhdar especially can maybe.
I think you know my views. As Guru has said, Mandela, when he formed this group, told them that there were three priorities. In those days, that's 2007. One was Myanmar, the other one was Darfur, and the third one, or perhaps the first one, was Palestine. Yes, as Guru has said, the group has visited several times. I think we went to Gaza together, and Carter led several visits. I didn't go these visits to the West Bank and Israel. I think we very strongly believe, all of us in the elders, that Palestinians have rights, and that those rights are trampled over. And I think that we all deeply regret that the Security Council is not doing its job on this issue, as it is not doing its job on quite a few other issues. I feel, of course, very, very strongly about the fact that the people of Palestine are not only not allowed to exercise their national rights, but even their basic human rights. Children cannot go to school. You cannot have your property. Women deliver their babies in the streets because the ambulance is not allowed to go to hospital. I'm sure you are very familiar with all the Israeli leaders, I think, have been talking about apartheid in Palestine, exercised by Israel. Rabin, a long time ago, warned about the fact that Israel was sliding into an apartheid system. And I think this is unfortunately a reality.
Prince Latina. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Waldo from Prensa Latina. Recently, the SG Guterres sent letters to member states on the issue of the reform that he is promoting. Did you discuss with him yesterday this issue, and what do you think should be the priority for this process of the reform? Thank you.
So what part of he is proposing, changes in different areas. So which one are you specifically thinking of? I'm thinking
in general on the reform of United Nations.
Yeah, well, so let me say, we support the United Nations. We support the Secretary General. We think that he needs to be given as much support as possible to make his work and the United Nations work as effective as possible. This is essential, and I think I mentioned the security reform issue just because we had taken initiatives as elders, but he is taking initiatives now that he wants to pursue to make a more efficient and more streamlined system across the different institutions, and certainly the way they work at the country level, so that is something which, under his prevention as an important umbrella, thinking, bringing all the key issues together, they all are relevant under the idea of prevention.
Hi, thank you for the briefing. My name is Ibtisam Azim from Al Arab Al Jadid newspaper. I have a question regarding refugees in general, especially in the Middle East, but also in other areas. And which role do you see that the elders can play, and which role the UN institution can help for them to play this role? Thank
Please,
you.
Mary, can you, we have to share a little here.
Yes, the elders have been very focused on the issue of refugees and also the issue of migrants. And we've issued a paper about it, we've talked about it a great deal. We want the Convention on Refugees to be upheld and the rights of refugees to be respected. We are very distressed about the fact that the countries that are neighbours, for example, of Syria, take in so many Syrians, and then those who try to go further are blocked in so many different ways and find great difficulty, even though they are rightly regarded as refugees. We also want to see a greater focus on a positive narrative about migration. And we are supportive of the decision taken in the General Assembly here in the United Nations last September on having a global compact for refugees, a global compact for fair, inclusive migration. And we are using all our advocacy and efforts to try to support that, because it is shocking to see the situation at the moment. And it's a shocking feature of the 21st century that there are so many barriers, and that the rights and respect for rights of both refugees and of migrants, including migrants who come into countries without permission, they still have rights. They still have the right to be respected.
Israel 24.
Nina from I24. Mr. Brahimi, can I ask you about what's your assessment of this idea of safe zones in Syria? Do you think it's remotely practical with your experience?
I mean, the short answer is that I don't know. I think we were talking about this morning, and we welcome any decision, any initiative that will give some respite, if not to all Syria, at least part of the people of Syria. That's how we look at it, while we see a little bit what it looks like and whether it's part of a plan or just one of these many initiatives that have no future.
But what role do you think the UN has to play in this? Do you think there should be UN monitors on the ground there?
This again, I don't know. The government has already said that they will not accept monitoring by the United Nations. I will not have a view about this for the moment.
Thank you very much. I'm at Fatih, American Television News. With regard to your mandate, which includes also democracy and human rights, and your desire that multilateralism must be promoted and understood by the younger people, please allow me to go back to the Middle East, where suppression of human rights is a fundamental tool of governing throughout the region, with no exceptions whatsoever. What do you have to say for the young people in the Middle East who have been left without attention to their cause and their demands, legitimate demands, to live freely, to be treated as a human, to have a fair opportunity to pursue their futures, which is all suppressed by regimes, whether it's military regimes, whether it's regimes gave up their military uniform and wear civilian suits, it still remains the same, or whether they wear whatever costume fits their role in suppressing these people. What does the elders have to do and say to the young people, and what concrete steps that can be taken to give hope to these young people? Thank you.
Well, I'm not so sure that, you use the word mandate. We have a mission statement given to us and accepted by us by Mandela, which has high ideals. That doesn't mean that we have a mandate to just make change on our own. These are historic and traditional problems or that have been long, have been over a long time, and while in my lifetime, although there has been a slow process, there has been improvements in certain countries of the region you're talking about. However, much too slow, and not, you mentioned young people, I would add women. There are, in many of the countries you are speaking about, discrimination of women at a terrible level. The report, was it from the World Bank, Mary? The report on the Arab states.
UNDP.
UNDP.
It was UNDP. It was a great report, and I remember I
Human
was...
Development Report.
Human development. And it really raised the questions, in a way that I also, when I visited countries of this region, I could see that that report had been heard and seen. And I think it gave also some new inspiration, certain to women, who started becoming more assertive and working together to make change. Now, we have visited several of the countries of the region you're talking about, and of course we have stimulated civil society, we have spoken with leaders, we have spoken in public hearings about the challenges that you are reporting. That's what we can do.
And if I could just build on what Guru was saying, we've actually specifically targeted young people.
Yes.
When the elders go, for example, we've talked to young people in Gaza, we've talked to young people in the West Bank, we've talked to young Israelis, we've talked to young Egyptians.
In Cairo,
in
we
Cairo,
did, yes.
we had a very televised discussion with young people deliberately. So we try to, we acknowledge the youth of the region, and we also very much want to give them a voice, help them to get their voice out, make it clear that for the elders, the situation of young people is something we are particularly focused on, and it's part of a way of doing. We've done it also in other parts of the world, but notably in that region.
If I may allow a follow-up just very quickly, civil society is non-existent. It's either a mouthpiece for the regimes they operate under, or they are being chased, arrested, incarcerated without any trial. So just to make a clarification about civil society in the Middle East. Thank you.
Yes, we have been very concerned about the shrinking of civil society space, about the repression and the arrests, but we also recognise that there is still, despite all of this, a vibrant civil society. There is.
There is a vibrant civil society in many countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Lebanon. But still, I think, as you know, I can't speak here on my own behalf, but as elders, we recognize that the region is in trouble, very, very serious trouble, probably the worst area in the world today. There was a dream with the Arab Spring, where that is going to go. The last word is has been not said yet. But I think we have confidence in the young, we have confidence in women, we have confidence in the educated people, and I hope that the diasporas also will help their respective countries. And we certainly keep in touch and try to keep in touch and follow what things are, developments there.
Matthew? Sure, thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for the briefing. It's very interesting. I noticed on the Elders website that Myanmar is one of the 10 issues listed under your work. So I wanted to ask you about Myanmar, where it seems like Aung San Suu Kyi may have been on the path to become an elder, or may still be on such a path, but more recently she's blocked the Geneva, the Human Rights Council from visiting the issue of the Rohingya. Did it come up with the Secretary General? What are your thoughts, and what's your current work on the issue of Myanmar, particularly on the issue of the Rohingya? Thanks.
Well, we have over the last, I guess, 4 years now, maybe 5, we have had several visits to Myanmar as elders to try to support democratic change in that country. And then in addition, Kofi Annan was asked to lead the commission to look into the Rohingya issue. And he discussed it with us as elders in one of our meetings before taking it on, because we had already been engaged as a group. And now the question was with Kofi Annan, and we all supported that he should say yes and do this, because his name, his background, his reputation, everything was needed to try to help in Myanmar on that issue. And then, with regard to Aung San Suu Kyi, she was an honorary elder because she was imprisoned in her home. And then, as she became a political figure, one of the criteria of being independent global leaders was no longer there, so she couldn't become an elder at that stage. So that, it's just. But we have, first of all, we have supported her right to stand for office. We have supported the changes in Myanmar towards more democratization. And Kofi Annan is, of course, involved directly. And we have spoken with also the Secretary General about the issue, as we have met with him here now.
The Commission of Kofi has issued an interim report, and they will issue a final report in August.
Yeah. Evelyn?
Thank you, Evelyn Leopold. I heard you this morning also at the IPI, and you talked a lot about the environment. The United States is the world's second largest polluter in the world. Whether or not it stays in the Paris Agreement or not, there have been many measures that the Earth is flat, that the science community has been downgraded, money taken away for those studying climate change. What kind of world pressure can be put on this administration, whose name we shall not mention, to rectify it, since a lot of industry and a lot of, in fact, the entire American public is in favor of ameliorating climate change?
Thank you. It's interesting, since President Trump was elected, how galvanized the climate community in a very broad sense is here in the United States. And that has been noted from the rest of the world. You've had marches the day after the inauguration. You had a huge march, and a lot of it was about climate and women. Linked together, and that's very appropriate because there's a very strong gender dimension to climate change. You had scientists marching on the 22nd of April. On the 29th of April, you had huge marches all over the United States and elsewhere. And this is a new development. Apart from that, you also have a very strong business lobbying at the moment for the United States to stay in the Paris Agreement. In the New York Times today, there will be a full page in the Wall Street Journal tomorrow. Business leaders are concerting. They're speaking to the administration. They're speaking to the Business Council. Some of the Business Council members are part of this commitment to try to see. And we're into the stage now where the Paris Agreement has not only been adopted, it has been ratified by more than 140 countries, including the United States. And we're in the state of implementation, and that is an implementation more by cities and business and states like California. And it's quite clear that that's going to continue here in the United States. I think the rest of the world is also going to go ahead with the Paris Agreement. Hopefully, the United States will not pull out. If it does, it is a rogue state in the world. I have to say that. It becomes a rogue state because it is totally failing in its clear responsibility as one of the largest emitters and a historic emitter for the problems that are being caused by disrupted climate in very poor countries and communities around the world. It is unconscionable if the United States pulls out. If the United States stays in but does not support the Green Climate Fund, does not support the IPCC, does not support the commitments, that too is unconscionable. And I think we have to be very clear in understanding the injustice of that. But at the same time, I'm aware that there is a lot of goodwill in this country for maintaining the climate commitments. And even if at the federal level there's bad decision making, below the federal level, I think there will be a lot of endeavour to make up for the lack of federal leadership and lead from cities and states of the United States and in civil society and in business and in philanthropy, etc.
Thank you. I want to turn a bit personal question. Your qualification exceeds everybody in Europe. Why we did not see you in the chair of Secretary General? And number two question, if I may, how we can challenge the veto here at the United Nations? How we can see one day veto will go away? Thank you.
You know, when I was Prime Minister of Norway, one of the 3 periods of my time, there was a process of selecting the next Secretary General. It was at the time when Boutros Ghali became the new Secretary General. At that time, you know, I was kind of, a lot of people were talking, and several, Security Council members were asking for my name and all that. So it has happened over my lifetime that this issue has been there. And then again, when Kofi Annan was, and I was Prime Minister, and I kept completely out of it. I was doing my work, and there was such a lot on my plate that it was not, it was not my initiative in any way. Then, when Kofi Annan came, and people started asking me again, I said, look, this is Africa's turn, because I didn't really feel that Boutros Ghali had fulfilled the rights of Africa to have that leadership. So I pointed to Kofi Annan, to everybody who approached me. That's the story of that. And so anyway, it's been, we are very happy about the selection now of the Secretary General, and Guterres. I met him first time in 1983, a young leader of the Social Democratic Party of Portugal. I remember saying to my staff and others, this young man is going to be a future leader. And then he became Prime Minister, he became UNHCR, and we have him here. I think it was a great choice.
Sure. And the veto?
Well, sorry, the veto we spoke about earlier, huh? The restraint, even the restraint of the veto that we have tried to advocate, is a hard sell. We have just spoken with the deputy
Vice President of
Vice President, some of the Vice Presidents of the Assembly, and they are explaining, how they are now looking into these issues on, what did they call it? A thought paper? Yeah, not a non-paper.
Food for
thought paper. I mean, it's up, and they were explaining how difficult that even the limited question that we have raised is. Something should change, yes, and there's need.
Ms. Robinson, back to me. I actually work for South African Broadcasting. I failed to mention that at the top. So why not end, I think, appropriately on a question about South Africa, given Nelson Mandela's spirit in the room. In 2012, I believe it was, you gave the Nelson Mandela Lecture in South Africa, where you raised questions about whether the young democracy was living up to its ideals and the expectations that the international community had. 5 years later, given the political dynamics we're seeing, the fractured African National Congress, the lack of inclusive growth in the country, I wonder, given Nelson Mandela's overarching presence in terms of the work that you do, how you feel South Africa is progressing since that lecture in 2012.
I remember very well preparing for that lecture in 2012. I felt it was an honour to be invited to give it. And I remember talking to many of my South African friends, and they said to me, if you're a true friend, speak the truth. Speak truth to power. And that was what I tried to do. Since then, I'm afraid the situation has undoubtedly worsened, and worsened in a very worrying way. I think for all of the friends of South Africa, this is of considerable concern. Not wanting to go too much into that, the elders are very conscious of being very rooted in the fact that we were brought together by Nelson Mandela, and this is our 10th anniversary year. And we're going to start the year on Mandela's birthday, on the 18th of July, in Cape Town. And we hope that our first chair, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, will be able to be with us. He's certainly very keen to, if his health allows, which hopefully it will. And we will have an active year addressing issues of promoting the values of Mandela. We haven't finalised our programme yet for that, but we're aware of the fact that we have a very strong African base in the elders, with Mandela initially, with Archbishop Tutu, with Lakhdar Brahimi, and of course with our current chair, and Graça Machel, and Kofi Annan. So we will.
The 9 are African.
Exactly. Yes, at the moment. So we probably need to balance that more in the future. But I'm looking forward to getting back to South Africa. I haven't been there for a while, and having a better opportunity to assess the situation. But I know from my friends, I know from my involvement with the Mo Ibrahim Foundation and being on the board and the prize committee, that there is a real concern because South Africa is so important to Africa, and so important to the future of an overall stability in Africa. So I think it's a case of, in the words of Archbishop Tutu, being prisoners of hope about the future of South Africa.
Thank you, Sylviane. I think that'll have to be the last question because they have to go.
I'm Sylviane Zehil from Bureau Chief for L'Orient Le Jour, a newspaper, daily newspaper based in Beirut, Lebanon. My question is on refugees and the burden, the extra burden on the country, on the Lebanese country particularly. There is a hospitality fatigue. And are you hearing? Are you hearing me? Yeah. More than 500,000 youth are without employment. There is the refugees, Syrian refugees, and the Lebanese are now under the poverty line. And there is a huge burden on the country and the institution, on education, on municipalities, and on every single part of the country. What can you do? Are you willing to go and visit, to assess yourself the situation, and then bring ideas to the international community, or to embark in more positive and strong way of sorting out trying to find out a solution? Thank you.
I have been very, very much aware of the sacrifices made by the people of Lebanon. And every single time when I was doing Syria that I spoke about this, I mentioned Lebanon. That Lebanon, with 4.5 million people, had, as a matter of fact, about 2 million Syrians. Not as, the figures are about 1 million something. I think it's about 2 million, counting all the Syrians that are not mentioned as refugees. So, we have a great deal of admiration and respect. And also, we deeply regret that the international community is not helping Lebanon as much as it deserves and as much as it needs. I don't think we need to go there to know what the situation is. But if it was felt that a visit by some of us would help, I'm sure that we would be happy to, some of us will be happy to go there. But I think the situation is very well known. Lebanon is doing more than anybody else for the Syrian refugees, and we hope that the international community will help them a little bit more.
Great. Thank you very
But
much.
the best help is the end of war in Syria so that people can go back home.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.